Place of our friend Ford O'Connell. He Skypes in from Washington, D.C. And Ford, as we welcome you back to America's Forum, we've got to set up the distinction. People who run for the House of Representatives involved in very public campaigns, but these races for House leadership, well, they have a cloak of secrecy, not to mention the secret ballot during the House Republican Conference meeting to make these determinations.
Well, look, JD, you're absolutely right. Here's the deal. It may not be House of Cards, but somewhere Frank Underwood is certainly blushing. It's a secret ballot situation. And the deal is, can you get 117 votes? And every congressman who's voting, it may be a secret ballot, but they're asking themselves two questions. Will you keep my legislative priorities at the top of the agenda? And secondly, are you going to keep the committee assignments, the Plum Committee assignments in my home state, as we're seeing right now with a little battle over the Pennsylvania delegation and the House and Ways Committee spot, given that Gerlich is about to retire?
Yeah, you have a situation, that Ways and Means spot coveted. I know from personal experience, thus far the first and only Arizonan to have membership on the Ways and Means Committee. And so people are looking for allies. There are questions of congressional tenure, as you talk about. But the curious thing about House leadership is the fact, I guess they're spinning this as geographical diversity. You have guys from states that went for Obama in the leadership, Kevin McCarthy from California, the odds-on favorite. But I just wonder, with the conservatives who were upset in Virginia 7, who sent Eric Cantor packing, nationally, does the House Republican Conference run a risk of upsetting the base by embracing Kevin McCarthy as the next majority leader?
Yes and no. That's what the conservative talk radio crowd, Mark Levin, Rush Limbaugh, Laura Ingraham, want you to think. But you're right. This is a lot of inside baseball. And remember, JD, we're going to do this again right after the midterms. So this is one of these things, though, where what really red state Republicans and conservatives are saying is, we are pining for a seat at the table. And frankly, right now, given the tight window between Cantor's loss and when these races occur, we just want one seat at the table. And if that's going to occur, it's likely to be in the whip spot with Steve Scalise.
Well, we want to get to the whip spot in just a second, because that's interesting to hear about. And what I noticed, just an observation about the Louisiana delegation, it's as if those guys in the cradle start to count votes and make speeches. Regardless of partisan label, I have never seen a more politically adroit delegation than that from Louisiana. At least that was my experience in the Congress of the United States. Before we get to the whip race and the possibilities of Steve Scalise, let's talk a little bit more about this election for majority leader. Raul Labrador, the underdog, stepping forward when Jeb Hensarling and Pete Sessions said, no, it looks like McCarthy has this wrapped up pretty early. Is this purely a protest run for Congressman Labrador?
It absolutely is. Nobody wanted to step up, and that there's for a couple of reasons. One is McCarthy built up a heck of a lot of IOUs, and nobody really wanted to expend their political capital between now and the midterms trying to secure that slot. And secondly, you're absolutely right. There just was not the need there. And Labrador, frankly, he didn't know the committee members all that well. He didn't know his members of Congress. I mean, this is kind of like a, hey, I'm throwing my hat in there. And remember, there's something else here, JD, that most people don't know. And that is, you cannot be in leadership and be a committee leader at the same time. So a lot of folks like Paul Ryan and others said, I'm going to take a pass. So this was really McCarthy's race to lose from the outset.
All right, we talked just a minute ago about the race for whip, and we should take a look at that ballot. We touched on it briefly. 3 candidates running to become the whip, succeeding Kevin McCarthy, and that leadership is presumably McCarthy moves up to the number 2 spot. You mentioned Steve Scalise of Louisiana. Peter Roskam of Illinois is the chief deputy whip. It's worth noting there was another gentleman from Illinois by the name of Denny Hastert who vaulted under extraordinary circumstances, vaulted from chief deputy whip to Speaker of the House some years ago. And then Roskam's Indiana neighbor, Illinois and Indiana lining up there next door to each other, Marlin Stutzman throwing his hat in the ring. You take a look at this, Roskam presumably has the whip apparatus He's been counting votes on issues. Does that give him the edge with the title of Chief Deputy Whip?
Okay, this is Cold War inter-party politics at its finest with a little bit of a genteel heel. Right now, my sources indicate that Scalise has about 110 votes. You need 117 to actually win the race. Roscom has between 90 and 95. Stutzman is a wild card. Nobody knows what he has. What Roscom is trying to use his whip apparatus for is saying no one's going to get 117 on the first round, so guess what? The rules say that Stutzman has to go. Then it becomes a two-way between Roscom and Scalise, and that is where Roscom thinks that he can actually beat out Scalise, is using that whip apparatus to actually whip those votes at the very last minute on a second or third ballot, JD.
It is so interesting. At once, it is inside baseball. In another sense, it is evocative of the plot line for House of Cards, the American version with Frank Underwood as opposed to Francis Urquhart in the BBC production of about 20 years ago. But having gone through that myself, running for the number 3 position as chairman of the House Republican Conference, you are on the phone continually. And it's a curious situation where people will say to you, hey, I'm really for you. I can't announce, though, because publicly I've done something else. Not to suggest that members of Congress would necessarily be duplicitous, but you've got that going along with the second ballot notion, and especially in this whip race, really leaning on guys on the second ballot. So you're telling us right now that in the race for whip, the 2 principal candidates are saying, okay, you may be somewhere else on the first ballot. Come with me on the second ballot. Will you do that? And really, that answering that question is going to be the key question to determine who the next whip will be on the majority side of the aisle.
Well, you're absolutely right. And if you want to get really inside baseball, JD, keep an eye, as I said, on the Pennsylvania delegation. It's 13 members. Right now, publicly, they're split, but we know this is Washington. They'll smile at you and tell you what you want to hear and stab you in your back later. And what Roscom is trying to tell these folks is, I know you're moderates. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm a blue state guy like you. To pacify the red state conservatives, I'm going to appoint a deputy whip who's from the red state. And if he does that, what's going to wind up happening is Dedham in California, Bachman in Minnesota are likely to come over to Roscom's camp. There's really about 10 votes here that are passing back and forth. It's between a handful of outsiders that they themselves are not really in red states and trying to corral that Pennsylvania delegation. And the folks that are not happy about this right now are sitting in Texas with the 24 delegates because they really want to consolidate their seat at the table.
So, again, it's the promise of appointing a chief deputy whip that may be the determining factor in this race. It is glorious inside baseball, and we appreciate that. But Ford, given your expertise and past experience, we would be remiss if we didn't look a little further ahead, away from Capitol Hill to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Hillary Clinton continues her book tour. She's sitting down for interviews last night with Fox News. In the minute half left, what impressions are you taking away of Hillary, given the fact her book's not selling that well and she's encountered some difficulties in previous interviews?
Well, her first week on the book/campaign trail, she really tripped and fell. Last night, she really pulled off a doubleheader between CNN and Fox and pretty much was very solid. Every time I watched her talk, all I thought about, JD, was Florida and Ohio. And I'm going to tell you something. She's starting to get her campaign sea legs. Her problem is the following. She wants to run on experience and the fact that she's a woman. What she needs is a domestic vision going forward that does not upset the Democratic base if she tries to inch away from Barack Obama on foreign policy. She's trying to walk a tightrope. The question is, she can be knocked off if we can actually get somebody in the Democratic primary to run to the left of her. Kneecap Hillary Clinton before she gets out of the box, and the problem's solved, JD.
Spoken like
politics, my friend.
Spoken like a true political consultant. Ford O'Connell Skyping in from Washington, D.C. We thank you so much for your time and insights.
Thank you, JD.
Talking about these leadership races, I was on the phone. People would say, yeah, JD, I'm behind you. Problem is, they were way behind me. They didn't vote for me. So I've been through it. Your take on this emerging leadership race and some of the inside baseball. Intriguing to you? We'd love to get your comments. Why don't you Skype them to us at Newsmax TV, #America's Forum.